Shall I fire when ready?
Go for it.
All right. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the Off the Clock for. I'm allowed to take my mask off. So welcome to the Off the Clock for Show 7, Little Women. My name is Beth Burrier. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and at CLOC. I do a lot of things. For Little Women, I'm the music director. I was also the music director for Pajama Game in the 4th slot, and was the stage director for Wizard of Oz last week. And I'm the associate artistic director when I'm not on Cape Cod, besides being sad. I'm the head of the musical theater program at Manhattanville College, which is a teeny tiny little liberal arts college in Purchase, New York, which is about 30 miles north of New York City. And I just finished my first year there. And my associate at Manhattanville is actually Miles Plant, who you all saw at Gentleman's Guide and Wizard of Oz. So yeah, that's enough about me. So Little Women, of course, is based on a very famous novel. You all know this. And you probably also know that many musicals are based on books, because it's really hard to write a musical, and it's easier if you have something to start with, whether it's a play or a movie, or a play that became a musical, that became a movie, that became a musical. So in fact, several of the shows this summer were also based on books. Gentleman's Guide, which was the 3rd show this summer, was based on a book called Israel Rank, the Autobiography of a Criminal, and a very little known book. I had never heard of the book. It was published in 1907, and the movie, the British movie, Kind Hearts and Coronets, which came out in 1949, that I had heard of, is also based on that book. Pajama Game is based on the novel 7.5 Cents, which came out in 1953. It was a Book of the Month Club selection. And by 1955, the author had worked with George Abbott and Adler and Ross to turn it into the Pajama Game. So only 2 years, and it was a Broadway musical. Imagine that won the Tony. And of course, Wizard of Oz, based on the wonderful Wizard of Oz, written in 1900. And then Little Women, based on the novel by Louisa May Alcott, which was published, the first came out in 2 parts. The first part ends with Meg's marriage, actually, and it came out in 1868, and then the second half, from Meg's marriage through to Joe becoming engaged to Professor Bear, came out in 1869. And the book, if you read some of the scholarly literature about it, there are themes in it of domesticity and work and true love, and that everyone in the book, all of the characters in the book, need to find a balance between those 3 things, and they're all interconnected in order to fulfill their destiny as humans and characters in the book. And Louisa May Alcott, with Little Women, invented a whole new genre of literature, where she took children's literature and sort of period romance novels and morality stories and wove them all together into Little Women, which was then followed by Joe's Boys, Little Men, 8 Cousins, which is followed by Rose in Bloom, and there's one other one, An Old-Fashioned Girl, that are all sort of in that same vein. Now, Little Women is definitely the most famous one, and I think we can all probably agree on that. There have been other literary versions of the story, including, are you ready for this? Little Vampire Women. Right? I haven't read either one of those, and I need to track these down. And Little Women and Werewolves. Okay. And this, the show tonight is just one in a long line of dramatized versions of the show. The first one was in 1912, went to Broadway in 1912, and that version was written by Marion DeForest, who was a leading progressive in the women's movement. She was a journalist and a playwright and a founder of Zonta, which is about women's service and women in the workforce. Yeah. And that version went to London in 1919. So that was the first stage production, a play, not a musical, In 2009, a gentleman by the name of Gerald Murphy wrote a one-act version of it that has been performed here, there, and everywhere. There are 2 other full-length play versions of it floating around, and one that's called Joe and Louisa that came out in 2019. It's by Isabella Russell Ives, and it won a playwriting award for Best New Play of 2019. And it's about Joe, and so Louisa May Alcott is a character, and she and Joe have a big conversation because Joe is unhappy and she's demanding rewrites. And it sounds very, I want to track that down and read it too. And in 2018, Kate Hamill, who is an Ithaca College grad, has become quite famous for her dramatized versions of Sense and Sensibility, Pride and Prejudice, and Vanity Fair. She wrote a version of this in 2018, and I'm sure that it's going to have a big life as well, because her works are really, really great. So, plays, films, there have been 7 film versions of the story. Who knew? Not me. The first one was a silent film. It came out in 1917 and is now considered a lost film. It's just disappeared, but it did exist, it was made. And there was another silent version that still exists that was made in 1918. Neither of these had anyone that we would probably remember today in them. But the first sound version, and I bet I've seen bits and pieces of it, starred Katharine Hepburn as Jo. Still a black and white version, but that was the first version, the first film of it that had sound. The first color version came out in 1949, and that had June Allison as Jo, which is a little bit mind-boggling to me, but that's okay. And Elizabeth Taylor as Amy, and Janet Leigh as Meg. So that was kind of a star-studded cast in 1949. There was a version in 1994 with that sort of 80s Brat Pack star, Winona Ryder, as Jo. Another version in 2018 that celebrated the 150th anniversary of the novel. And then, of course, the most recent film that came out in 2019 that starred Meryl Streep as Aunt March. Oddly enough, I never think of Aunt March as a starring role, but when it's Meryl Streep, I guess it is. Right? Emma Watson from the Harry Potter franchise as Meg, and multiple other famous actors in various roles. And it earned 6 Oscar nominations, including one for Best Picture. And yet, there's still more TV versions, right? Because stage, film, TV. There was a musical version of it that came out in 1958 that Richard Adler, who wrote Pajama Game and Damn Yankees, did the music for. I had no idea that existed until I started researching this. I would love to find it, because I bet there's some really great music in that. It was serialized 4 different times for the BBC, 1950, 1958, 1970, and then in 2017, which was also co-funded by PBS and became part of their Masterworks series, so you might catch it on PBS at some point. In 1978, it was a 2-part miniseries for NBC, which then became a series, and I am positive that happened on NBC because that was during the run of Little House on the Prairie, which ran on that network from 1974 to 1982. Another terrifically successful, financially lucrative children's story that made it to TV. So I have a feeling those 2 things are connected, but that's just my personal conspiracy theory. There were multiple anime versions, so many that I didn't even write them down. And right, hard to imagine, but Little Women as anime. And then there was, in 1998, a beautiful opera of it, commissioned by Houston Grand Opera, written by Mark Adamo. And there are a couple of arias from that have become just standard repertoire. including Things Change, Joe. That's sort of the big aria from that. And then, finally, the version that you're going to see tonight, or that you've already seen this week, which was written by Mindy Dickstein and Jason Howland. Good, Beth. This is good. That's impressive that you can't remember the composer's name, but I have the score, so I can look. And it had a very short run on Broadway from January to May in 2005, 137 performances. The director, Jen Delac, who is new to CLOC this summer, she came from Penn State, is an MFA candidate there at Penn State, and her mentor at Penn State, and a former colleague of mine, I was on the faculty at Penn State for 7 years, Susan H. Schulman was the original Broadway director. So we have especially Jen, has a very personal connection to the show through Susan. And the original Broadway Amy McAlexander, was a student of mine at Otterbein when I was on the adjunct faculty there back in the day, back before I was even at CLOC. So it's been a couple of years. So it was really exciting for Jen to work on it and talk to Susan about it, and what Susan's ideas were for the show originally, and what happened with it and what didn't happen with it, and the life that it's had since Broadway, which is arguably much more successful than the run, because it's had a huge regional life, not least because the music is terrific, lots of roles for women, familiar title, all of that good stuff. The show was written for Sutton Foster in the role of Joe, so many patrons, as I chat on the patio, have said, oh, I can hear Sutton's voice in that, I can hear how it was written for her. And then Maureen McGovern in the role of Marmee. Those were the two sort of big name actors attached to the project. Yeah? So, I mention all of these different versions because every single version that you see of it is going to be slightly different, and through the lens of that creative team. And if you're really, 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 has anybody seen it yet? Or do we have a whole, okay. So spoiler alert, it is not exactly the novel. Yeah. Most of the major plot points that occur in the novel occur in the show, but there are a lot of little differences here and there. So if you are a Little Women purist, just be forewarned. And it is told as a flashback. All of Act 1 is, it takes place it sort of starts in the present, more or less, and then we flash back to earlier in Joe's life. So, which of course also doesn't happen in the novel. And I remember the first time I listened to the cast album, I thought, what is happening? Because I'm a Little Women purist. It's one of my favorite books. And I actually had to see it staged at Penn State. Susan Schulman did a production of it with our choreographer, Caitlin Belsick. You've all met her. When she was a junior, her class put it on. I had to see Susan stage it in that workshop for me. Oh, now, okay. So hopefully, if you have listened to the cast album and thought, I don't quite get this, the production tonight will clear that up for you. Other things that I would love for you to know is all of the four daughters all have musical themes. They mostly have two themes. We'll start with the youngest one, Amy. And maybe because she's the youngest, I don't know. She really only has one theme, which is her love song that she, okay, spoiler alert. She has a love song. I won't tell you, but just in case. So her little theme, her big, important, exciting theme is, am I going to be able to play this? Yes. Except that I'm going to play a better part of it than that. I'm going to play this part. Yes. Yeah. So that little theme for Amy shows up about halfway through Act 2 and then comes back when Joe is thinking about her. So here it is one more time. So that's Amy's little theme. And then if we go up, the next character up is Beth. And she has two themes. Her first one, of course, Beth is the piano player. Shocking. I always was delighted by that when I read the book when I was little. I thought, oh, maybe I'll be a piano player someday. So this is the song that she plays on the piano. It's called Off to Massachusetts. So this is one of her themes.